Good morning, dear friends. Welcome. Today is Wednesday, the 26th of Adar 1. Is it still March 6th? And we are here to study the entire Talmud, one page, one line at a time. Presently, Maseches Pesachim, chapter 6, but not for long. Ayin Gimel Amud Aleph. We're going to read the final. I actually was tempted to even skip, and I don't like to skip. I was almost tempted, just because I feel like we need a little CPR maybe, but but instead of skipping, we'll zip, if that's okay, through the final lines of this chapter. And here you can see my Googling about the base medrash of Teaneck. And my commitment is that today we're going to start a new Mishnah and a new Perek, and it's going to touch upon different culinary facets. And so if we have anyone that has any background in cooking, or anyways, we'll need your insight. But I'm going to zoom back just a little bit for now. And again, I'm going to do this intentionally fast because I want to reach the Mishnah, and I want to try to get everybody back on track. Admittedly, I think some of us are struggling a bit with as Rebero described, the esoterics of describing the Karbanis and their designation and undesignation and redesignation. It's a little bit abstract, certainly. I mean, I believe it's important and worthy to learn, but for the purpose of our enjoyment, I'm going to zip through it, and then we'll get to the new Gemara. So you'll bear with me. You'll hold on. I want to read the words. I don't want to skip the words. We'll try to get the flavor, and then we will get to the new Mishnah, and we'll slow down considerably and enjoy. And I hope the professor will forgive me. So there's a question, a challenge between Rav Chisda to Rav Huna. Rav Huna is the one who staked an opinion about a korban that was meant to be brought for one use, and then the owner became unavailable and it was brought for another use without a formal redesignation. And in retrospect, if it happened, it was okay. And we're not going to challenge him, and we're going to do this really fast. Rav Chisda challenges Rav Huna with a halacha that describes in our Mishnah, if the person is ministering the Korban Pesach, and he shechs the Korban, and then finds out afterwards that the owners withdrew from this Korban Pesach, we said already he is potter. The Tani Allah, there's a clarifying brayso.
Sorry, Rabbi, sorry. Even though you want to go fast, what does withdraw mean? You have the ability after you dedicate something?
Good question. Good question. So you can't undesignate a korban that's been designated, but you can change the sub-designation, maybe sometimes. Meaning, if a korban is brought to be a korban Pesach, but there's no ownership, it's not able to be a korban Pesach. So can it then be brought as a shlomim? And we discussed that indeed it could be brought as a shlomim on a different day. Other karbanis, like a chatas, a sin offering, maybe, or an oila, or an asham, we said, can't be redesignated. But we were discussing why it can't be redesignated. We said maybe biblically it would be okay to be brought with another use without a formal saying, I hereby redesignate. And so we have our Mishnah talking about a Korban Pesach that was misbrought, meaning it was brought with the wrong circumstances, but you didn't know. We said you're off the hook. And there's a clarifying brayso that says like this: Bachol, if this were to happen in a weekday, meaning we're talking about Shabbos, but in a weekday, if you are the kohen, let's say, and you're administering a Korban Pesach, and after you shechta, you find out there are no owners, or there are no owners that are able to eat from it. No, I'm sorry, there's no owners. They all died, or they withdrew. This korban would have to be burned right away. On Shabbos, you can't burn something that is disqualified, but in a weekday, you saref miyad, you burn it right away. And Rashi notes, you don't have to wait for the meat to decompose, to break down. Even though this korban hypothetically could have been brought as a shlomim, if it would have been brought for that purpose, now that it was brought with the purpose of the Korban Pesach, it's immediately totally disqualified and discombobulated. Even the less they being that there is no owner, the disqualification is in the very animal itself. So just to recap, you shech the korban Pesach and you find that it has no owners. This is not a korban Pesach. It goes into the incinerator, except on Shabbos where you couldn't burn it right away. Now, if you believe that there is no need to formally undesignate this korban, and what is the disqualification? Maybe he shechted it in the wrong time. Because what he's saying is like this: a korban Pesach that has no owners would slip into the next available status, which is a korban Pesach, which is a shlamim. And we've already discussed that a korban Pesach, when not brought as a korban Pesach, is a shlamim. So the only reason why it's disqualified is because it was brought at a time where you don't bring shlamims. It's not super disqualified, it's just a little disqualified, meaning it's plausibly a korban, but there is a problem, and you should have to wait for it to break down. Again, we're probing how utterly problematic this korban is, and if you believe that its status automatically defaults to the next available korban, you don't need to formally change its status, so then you should not be able to burn it. The Tanya is that if the problem is inherent to the actual korban, the korban itself is a problematic korban, then you burn it. But if the problem has to do with dam uba alim, if the blood was lost or disqualified, or the owners is a problem with it, then you have to wait for the animal to first decompose, and then you can burn it. And this seemingly is the case where the main issue has to do with owners. And based on this, and again, I'm going through this fast, based on this question, we would have to revise the original citation, which seemed to say that if an animal lost its owner and it was slaughtered as an oila, it would be kosher. We have to add an important detail. There would have to be a formal redesignation. How do you redesignate? It could be verbal. You have to formally say, oh, this will no longer be an asham, it will be an oila. Again, I'm going through this fast. We have the opinion of Chia Bar Gamda, which it says, he's shared like this. Nizr kami chabura ve'amri. The sages, our friends, were studying this Gemara, and they said, the example of here was where we thought it had owners. The Korban Pesach, we thought it had owners. But it turns out that the owners became Tameh, and now they will be using a Korban Pesach. In this scenario, the Korban Pesach needs to be formally redesignated. But otherwise, in this case, the owners may want to use it for Pesach Sheni. And so because they're holding on to their korban, their animal, which they won't use for the Pesach Rishon, they'll use for the Pesach Sheni, it does not automatically change its status. You need to formally designate its status. But in an ordinary scenario, where there was an owner and the owner is no longer around, or the owner no longer needs a korban Pesach because they have another animal, in that case, it should happen automatically. How would you understand this? The animal was designated before midday. And the owners only died after Chatzos, which means the Havale Nira Vinitcha. This korban had a moment where it was viable korban. The crisis happened after the Zman, the time of the korban. And because it already was a korban Pesach that was capable of being brought, it cannot be repackaged. It has to be burnt right away. But how would this work for Rav, who says that animals cannot be fully pushed off? The Brisa that says that in a weekday it's burnt right away, it's because of the unique opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, which says that if you shecht something that shouldn't be a korban Pesach, it's totally possible. If you're going to embrace the voice of Rabbi Eliezer, there's collateral damage. Even though it's true, he will tell you that you could burn the korban right away, but he would never make you putter for doing it by mistake. So the explanation of the Brisa should be as follows. Amani, who is the voice of the Brisa that says that you'd burn the korban Pesach in the weekday if the owners are AWOL? It's the opinion of Yosef Bar Chanoi. You shech the korban with two intentions. Pesach, Korban Pesach, and Chatas, it's possible. Alma Psul Gufim Mishum Hachisar Miyad. And in this case, where the person interfered and had the wrong intention, it's utterly disqualified the korban itself, and therefore you burn it. And in a case, why does he hold the your potter? Because he holds like Rabbi Yeshua. Again, I'm reading this very fast. Rashi Amar Rav, the Amar Rabbi Shmuel ben Abi Rabbi Yechon Bebreka. Tanya Shmuel ben Abi Rabbi Yechon Bebreka Amar, and Yeshos b'yem leidem ashchabalam asidei mashmei so shneit will chayiv. If you have the opportunity to find out the status of the owners, but you didn't, then you're chayiv. It has to be burnt. My time, surely the fact that it has to be burnt right away is because he doesn't think that it needs to be formally uprooted. So the reason why he says the animal has to wait to be burnt is because it has to be fully disqualified by the passage of time. Ordinarily, the animal does not need to be undesignated, except in the case of where the owners can actually hold on to the korban. Rather, let's assume that the Mishnah is following Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanai. Let's read our Steinsaltz. We'll have a little essence, and then we can move into new territory. Therefore, on weekdays, the offering is burnt immediately. On Shabbos, in accordance to Rabbi Yeshua, one does not become liable. In the weekday, it's burnt right away because the korban is disqualified. And the only way it would become not disqualified is if there was a formal redesignation, which did not happen. So the korban is utterly disqualified. In a weekday, it is burnt. But you would not have to bring a chatas on Shabbos because you had no way to verify. You were engaged in the act of doing the mitzvah. You didn't know better. You're off the hook. My dear friends, at least we read the words, and hopefully maybe we understood a little bit. Hadron Allah Elu Dvarim. This concludes the 6th chapter of Pesachim, which was dominated by the discussion of the Karbanis. We talked about Chagiga Korban. We talked about different ways that the Korban Pesach could be disqualified. And with the final part of the Mishnah was in a scenario where the owners actually either disappeared, became disqualified, or found another korban. And in a fascinating exploration of how a korban may become disqualified, we also had the opportunity to explore areas of intention where you intended to do a mitzvah, you were consumed with the act of a mitzvah. Unfortunately, what you actually did was something that was not okay. And there are instances and opinions, primarily Rabbi Yeshua, which says that if your intention was pure, your intention was that you were engaged in the act of a mitzvah, you would actually be off the hook from bringing a chatas. You would see this as a super accident, almost as if what you did was beheter. Rabbi Eliezer disagrees with that. He would say that you would nonetheless be chayv. Anyways, this is the conclusion of Perek Elu Dvarim, the 6th chapter of Pesachim. Thank you for being along for the ride. Thank you for holding on tight in this final loop in the Talmud roller coaster. Again, probing. I'll just tell you in one sentence. We have a brisa that says that the korban, that the owners disappeared, and the owner, we said, is off the hook, according to Rabbi Yeshua. That very same scenario, when it happens in a weekday, it is burnt. And the Gemara probed with many different theories to understand why it would be burnt right away. Ordinarily, a tangential disqualification would not lead to an animal being burnt right away, would have to wait. The Gemara's answer is that based on our understanding of designation and redesignation, the absence of owners makes this an utterly disqualified korban, and therefore it is burnt right away. Adkan, Hadron Lach Elu Dvarim, and we return to study Elu Dvarim. Now, invite everyone to take a deep breath, a l'chaim, a virtual l'chaim, because we're about
Rabbi,
to... Yes, Professor.
does it mean that the job of a Kohen in the Beit HaMikdash was as dangerous was the job of a physician? That is, he might be held liable.
Liability. So yeah, there's a lot of liability being a Kohen, but I think the better answer is that there's an expectation that the Kohen would be on the ball. And as we explore the halachah, it becomes clear that we constantly differentiate between mistakes that could have been avoided, mistakes that could not have been avoided. But for mistakes that could be avoided, there was a high standard, there's a high degree of expectation on the Kohanim. There's a saying, Kohanim Zerizimim, we've seen this many times. The Kohanim are Zoras, they're full of alacrity and they're on the ball. It's partially a description of a nature, but I think it's a culture that's born out of the urgency and the need for them to be on top of things. Maybe akin to the way that certain industries you might envision with more or less being on the ball. It's partially the kind of people that go into that space, but it's also part of the expectation of the role. So yes, a kohen is expected to be very much on top of things. I believe that when Mashiach comes, when we'll have our application, it'll mitigate some of the challenges that we're describing. Unfortunately, it can't be brought on Yom Tov and Shabbos, which will still leave room for the need for manual and proper accounting. And
But very possible that Mashiach will bring a different understanding of electricity, of the nature of electricity.
so you're saying maybe we'll be allowed to use it on Shabbos too?
Yeah. Quite possible.
You never know. You never know.
Rabbi,
Yes, Alan.
I'm not happy that you ran through this so quickly. Because if Mashiach comes in next month, I'm going to forget what we said and we're going to have to rehash it.
Alan, let me ask you a question. Do you know what day of the week Erev Pesach is this year?
Oh,
Mark, are you there? Oh no, Mark.
Monday night. Monday night. It's a Monday night.
A Monday night. So here's the good news. We need to know this, but we're probably not going to know this specific nuanced conversation this year, except Alan, I can stand correctly. Tell me where I stand corrected. We did mention that in a weekday, the very korban where the owner has disappeared would have to be burnt right away. There's a little bit of a question if and why, and so that very much could occur. I sincerely hope that the first Korban Pesach, after the Beis Hamikdash is rebuilt and restored, I sincerely hope that we're not going to have shtick with the groups of the Korban Pesach, people joining and withdrawing. I hope that's not going to happen. But I guess humans are humans, and there's a certain part of high school cliquiness that will never go away. And so you can have a scenario where a few people want to join together, but then someone else joins them and they want to leave, and so they leave and make their own group, and then the other guy leaves to join. You know, you can imagine how this might unfold. But anyways,
You put a smile on my face.
And now let us begin a new Perek Shavi'i. And also I misspoke when I introduced the Gemara. I said we're on Ayin Gimel Amud Aleph, but in truth we were already on Ayin Gimel Amud Beis. We are now turning to Ayin Dalet, 74a. A wonderful day, a wonderful milestone. And so we had a Jew in Shul today, not really related to this, but it was, who tells me his last name is Tick, Mr. Tick. So I said, oh, Mr. Tick, do you know that there's a Tick family in Milwaukee? Maybe you're related. He starts laughing. He says, actually, I was once in Milwaukee, and my host told me, your name is Tick. You're probably related to the Tick family in Milwaukee. And so he calls them up. They say, call back Matzah Shabbos. He calls back Matzah Shabbos. And he says, Mom, Mr. Tick, are we mishpacha? They start laughing. They said, no way, we can't be mishpacha. You know why? Because our last name was not originally Tick. It was Tikovsky or something like that, Tikovitsky. And then he started laughing. He says, oh, my chavrus in Lakewood is named Tikovitsky. So probably you're long-lost cousins. So when he goes back to Lakewood, he tells his chavrus, I found your long-lost cousins, the Tikovitskys. Now they go by Tick. And the guy starts laughing. He says, no, our name is not really Tikovitsky. That was an assumed name when we wanted to change our name from whatever our original name was. And so all this is to say that if you think the Gemara is confusing, go try to trace your family genealogy. And it could also be quite a...
Actually, I know a family named Tak. So TikTok.
I'll tell you, I asked him, I said, Tick, was it originally Tikhtin? Because I know there's a famous Jewish town in Poland called Tikhtin. But no, that's not where Tikhtin, that's not where. And actually, when I lived in Chicago, there was an old shul that was in the process of closing down called Anshe Tikhtin. And it was founded by Polish emigres who arrived, I guess, in the turn of the century from Tikhtin. And anyways, Now we can learn a little Gemara. So until now, let's just remember something. We said in the very beginning of the Gemara that conceptually, Maseches Pesachim seems to be moving along the chronology and the order of the day. So we start off by talking about Bedikas Chametz, which is the cleaning of the Chametz before Pesach. We then proceed to talk about the burning of the Chametz, the creation of the matzah, the procurement of the maror. We talk about the Korban Pesach, Erev Pesach, how it's brought, how it's prepared, how the chaburas are, when it's a qualified Korban Pesach, when it's a disqualified Korban Pesach. We took a little tangent to talk about the Chagiga and what happens if the group, there's issues with the chabura. And now at long last, Perek Zayin, Perek Shavi'i, Ketzad Soilin is discussing the actual processing of the Korban Pesach itself, how it's cooked, how it's prepared. And so let me ask you a question, Alan. If Erev Pesach is Shabbos, when would they cook the Korban Pesach meat?
After Mashiach.
No. I mean, you're right. So basically, if you can't cook the meat on Erev Shabbos, or I'm sorry, Erev Yontif, you'll cook it after sundown. So although it's quite likely that in most years they would actually cook it before sundown, but chronologically, the cooking of the Korban follows the actual administering of the Korban. And the Korban was to be eaten by its owners. So now, we're going to read about how the Korban Pesach is eaten. Now, ordinarily, you'll say, since when is the Torah or the Gemara a cookbook? Since when is the Gemara deeply invested in how you cook something? The answer is ordinarily you're correct. But what's unique about the Korban Pesach is there is extremely precise and detailed instructions about how the Korban Pesach is meant to be prepared. It has to be whole, it has to be tzoli, right? And so we're going to see how the Korban Pesach is brought in those days. We're going to see ingredients and components, etc. Let us dive in. Ketzad soilin esa Pesach. How is the preparation, the roasting of the Korban Pesach? Mevi'in shapud shel rimon. So you bring a spit, a pole that's made out of pomegranate wood. And Rashi right away alerts us, shapud shel rimon, time of mefarish b'gemara. The Gemara is going to tell us and ask why this specific type of wood. And you shove it through the mouth of the animal ad base until it goes all the way through the animal and out the exit, the back exit. It reaches the anus, as Rabbi Stein says. And we put into it its legs and its innards, its entrails into the Korban. Okay, I'm sorry, not into the animal, but I suppose the feet are then affixed to the spit. Does that make sense? No. The legs, which are severed at the knees, and the innards, which were removed to be cleaned, were placed into the cavity of the animal. So I stand corrected. No, I don't know how you see that in Rashi. Rashi, I guess it has to all be in one. You have to cook it all together. Rabbi Akiva, if you're going to cook, if you're going to roast meat on the inside of the cavity of the animal, in a sense, what's being cooked inside the cavity is not being roasted because it's not exposed directly to the fire. It's a kind of cooking. Look at Rashi, Kimin Bishul Huzeh. Because now cooking the legs or the innards inside the cavity of the Korban, it's as if you're cooking it in a pot. Therefore, Rabbi Akiva says, Toilin chutzalei should be hung or placed in the spit outside of the animal's innards so that it is exposed directly to the fire. Rashi Toilin chutzalei toichvan mishpud Above the mouth of the animal, these other parts that have to be removed or come apart are affixed. So we have a machlokes between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yossi about the precise placement of those parts.
Was it?
Ein soilenes haPesach. The Mishnah continues and says, be certain not to roast the Pesach Loi al hashapud Rashi. Not on a regular shapud. Rashi says shal barzel made out of metal. And Rashi continues and says, "Kid mefarsh b'gemara." The Gemara is going to explain to us shamateches keshem ischamim miksasim ischamim kulay. Metal conducts heat in a very unique and profound way. And what will end up happening is the nitzla haPesach michoy mashpud, the meat that's on the inside adjacent to the spit, will end up cooking not from the fire, but from the heat of the spit. The metal that's on the inside of the animal is going to be heated by the metal that's on the outside. It'll be exposed to extreme cooking heat that's not directly in the fire. And so the Mishnah says, don't cook the Pesach loy ala shapud, not with a regular metal spit, loy al ha'as kala, not on a, look at Rashi. Can you tell me what this is? Grills. Not on a grill. The kula chataima with the same issue. Is the grill the same issue? I guess it is. Because what's happening is the grill is in between the fire and the meat. And so the part of the meat that comes through the grills is being heated by the fire. But whatever comes in contact with the grate will be heated by the grill. And indeed, if we think about it, if we were to Google a delicious burger, you know that the burger is going to have char marks from the grill, right? And the same thing, your steak will have maybe a crisscross or, right? If it's a grilled. And so that char, although maybe delicious, is actually a terrible problem for the Korban Pesach, which needs to be cooked directly on the heat of the fire. Is this so? Well, the Mishnah is going to have an anecdote that would challenge our assumption. I'm Rabbi Tzadok. We have a story of Rabbi Gamliel, Amar Letavi Abdai, who instructed his famous Eved, his famous servant called Tavi. He told him, say, Lono, go and roast for us. Esa Pesach ala Askala, please roast me my Korban Pesach on a grill. Challenging our understanding over here.
Rabbi,
yes, Doctor.
I'm trying to visualize. So what does the meat, if not metal, what on the fire? What's the fire? What's under the meat?
What's keeping the meat out of the fire?
Out of the fire and burning.
So there's a spit. There's a spit that I'm assuming is
made of what? It's not metal. What's it made of?
Wood. Yeah. Now,
Wood.
Wood, I guess, could be hot, but it doesn't conduct heat to the extent that metal does. And so the assumption is that the primary heat is coming from a direct fire source as opposed to from this. Now, the Gemara is going to explore the story of Rabbi Gamliel, and it's quite possible that the story will end up not being a contradiction, but an explanation, and the Gemara is going to say that we're missing some data, we're missing some information.
Rabbi,
yes,
I read somewhere where they said that it was mentioned that when they roasted the lamb, that it was roasted over hot coals on a spit, but over hot coals, not fire.
Interesting. Could be. Let's see if Google can help us. It doesn't look like Google's helping though.
Korban Pesach oven in the middle there. You had, yeah.
Korban Pesach roast.
Oven.
We're gonna get a bunch of roast pictures of roast. You know that.
Open fire. Yeah. Okay.
Oh, let's just see. Oh, here.
That looks like it's burning it.
So hold on, this is an illustration. I don't know where this picture, oh, Temple Mount activists. So we'll do with it as we wish, but this picture seems to approximately depict a scenario where they built a box of wood, which again become coal at some point. There's a wooden spit that runs through the animal. This appears to be the backside of the animal, and its legs are tied above. It looks like the entrails are on the inside, so maybe they're following the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. But suffice it to say, they turn the spit, but the meat is being cooked by the fire. So without claiming this to be an authoritative image, it definitely helps us visualize what we're talking about.
Wonder
If
how
I
long
recall,
wonder how long the wooden spit lasts.
you're saying when does the wooden spit not turn it, catch on fire itself? That's a good
Yeah.
question, which would lead me to suppose that probably the spit would have to be a little bit more elevated from the fire than it's being depicted here.
Right.
But that's just my assumption. The
Also, there's
interesting thing
different
today in
woods.
Israel, I'm sorry, doctor?
There are different woods. There's harder.
Yeah, maybe,
Yeah,
Maybe pomegranate wood
maybe
is particularly.
pomegranate wood doesn't burn so fast.
right.
We're gonna find out what the Gemara has to say. Now I'm trying to remember. Do you remember when we saw the Korban Pesach being done by the Samaritans, which again is entirely not a halachic appropriate way that we do the Korban Pesach? But if I recall correctly, do you remember how they cooked it? Well, here they cooked it on a grill. Again, I don't want to ruin anyone's appetite. There's certain facets of the Korban Pesach, the way it's being depicted, that's not like I'd personally we'd probably be more comfortable doing that in how do you call it? In kosher Brazil, where they bring us just a little spit with some meat on the stick, not the whole animal. But if you're going to enjoy an animal's meat, you should know where it comes from, and you should. Okay, so the Samaritans. This is actually the picture. So we have two pictures now to look at. This is the Samaritans cooking the Korban Pesach. Again, not a halachic Korban Pesach, but they're cooking it on pieces of wood. Are they whole? Are those whole animals? They're quite small, but I don't know.
Yeah.
They look like either real baby lambs or something.
That's where you get baby lamb chops from baby lambs.
Oh, so you see what they did? They put them on sticks. They shoved them into the fire. They covered it. Well, we're going to learn a lot more, but here it sounds like they sealed it in and they created. Anyways, all right, let's look at a few more pictures and we'll go on to the Gemara, and maybe some of these pictures will make more sense down the road. But here it would appear that the Samaritans, this is probably a different year, but they had the same idea. They had a furnace and they put the carbonites, their lambs on these pieces of wood, and they would put them into the fire. It seems like there was a communal cooking, whereas I don't think in the Korban Pesach it was necessarily a communal cooking event. But and here we can visualize. Again, my appetite is not exactly being piqued over here, just to be honest. But these are people in Yerushalayim making a demonstration of how a Korban Pesach could look. And so here you have the same thing. It's on a spit.
You could see empathy in the eyes of the young boys there. It's like watching a bris. You know, they're looking at an animal being burnt.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. We are. Then here, this is what confused me, because this picture looks like they're putting it on a grill.
Yeah.
So is that acceptable?
Yeah.
Again, of course, they're not necessarily observing Mishnaic.
Can you order rare, medium, or well done? I mean, I don't know.
It looked to me like it's all well done.
Yeah.
Anyways. All right, now I guess we'll go back to our.
It depends on the reach. The guy who has the longest reach is gonna have it well done.
All right, if anyone's appetite has been damaged, you're in good company. Okay, let's see. This is the mission. Okay, there's something very interesting here that's important to note.
Rabbi,
Yes, Professor.
the question maybe is based on not knowing the exact difference between roasting and cooking, but the picture that we saw that does indeed support Rabbi Akiva's statement that the entrails not only inserted, but just the internal parts of the animal are not roasted but cooked.
Well, Rabbi
When
Akiva, it sounds like he's complaining about it.
Right.
But
So, what does roasting involve? Just that the fire licks meat, but it's only the skin that the fire licks. How do we distinguish between roasting and cooking? What
the
is the
way,
difference?
so here's a good instance where I think a nuanced word in one language doesn't always fully convert to the other language. It does a little bit. So in English, cooking is like a general term for all different methods of preparing food by exposure to heat in varying methods. I think that's
It doesn't necessarily involve water.
right. It doesn't necessarily involve and it doesn't necessarily preclude. Cooking, I think, and again, I don't have a Webster dictionary, but I suppose something to the effect of preparing food by exposure to heat or whatever. Dr. Hammer?
I think in modern ranges, you have the option of cook or broil. Broil is the equivalent of grilling, where there's a possibility of it really touching directly to the fire or the heat or whatever. And in cooking, it's that's not necessarily what happens.
And conversely, doctor, roasting doesn't exclusively mean over fire. So here's what we have. In English, you have cooking, grilling, broiling, roasting, and then we'll add in baking, even though it's a different genre, just for fun. And all of these could define themselves loosely under the banner of cooking. In the Hebrew language, bishul today may also, a tafshil may describe a dish, but ultimately the Hebrew language, I think, and again, I may be corrected, is more nuanced in that bishul is with water, or at least in a pot or in a pan or something. So in Hebrew, you'll have bishul, you'll have tigun, which is frying, which by the way I didn't mention in the English. You have sali, which we are translating maybe as grilling, but it's effectively, as we're learning here, the halachic understanding is that it's exposed to the direct heat.
Completely dead.
Problems. And so in the Hebrew language, that's the distinction. Bishul would either mean with liquid or at least in a contained receptacle, and roasting here means directly over fire. Now, I don't think in ordinary life we make that much of a distinction, but in halacha we do. All right. Tosfos, all right, let's look at Tosfos for a second. So, Professor, I don't know if that was helpful, but I just wanted to note that in the Hebrew language, cooking bishul usually means with water or in a pot, and sli is direct heat. What I wanted to look at briefly is Tosfos. He says like this: you shove it through the mouth first. Here's the reason why it starts with the mouth. hagas shebashpod lemata the thicker end needs to end up at the bottom. And so you puncture the animal with the sharper point through the mouth, leaving at the end the wider part in the animal's mouth, because you don't want it to fall off the stick. And we orient the Korban Pesach not like the picture that we saw in Wikipedia, which has it oriented in a horizontal manner. Rather, Paisus is saying you want to have it vertically with the mouth facing downwards. In such a manner, the area where the shchita is faces downwards. And the blood can drip. The blood can drip that way. So there we have.
What would be the reason for the entrails?
I'm sorry?
What would be the reason to to leave the entrails in there?
They're yummy.
Ugh.
Well, again, I can't really give you a taste opinion. I don't really, but what I can say that they were cleaned, and only once they were it's utterly cleaned. And so I know, like, for example, casings for sausages can sometimes be made out of intestines and the like. And so I believe that's what we're talking about. Kishka, sausage, salami.
Cleaned out.
Not the stuff that Dr. Hammer got to enjoy last night, though. To have no fear.
The only reason I could think of is way back in the Chumash, it says that when God told him to roast the whole animal with the entrails and all, it's a pleasing odor for him,
For Hashem?
for Hashem.
Well, Alan, I mean, you're a pretty adventurous guy. So can't you imagine that parts of the animal which aren't typically served up in American polite society may have once been considered a delicacy? Probably had a different texture. Maybe it was a little more chewy.
Sweetbreads.
Sweetbread too. We're not,
No, in European countries, the poor ate the innards.
Yeah.
Yeah, people made lung, wing,
The kidney pies, the brain, the everything.
lung. What about liver?
Everything.
without going into it in depth, it looks like the Yerushalmi has a position that says you do it the opposite. You shove it in from the rear to the front. And so
That's what I'd like to do to Putin.
I'm sorry? Oh. As long as you didn't mention your own current premier, that's okay.
Him too.
I'm just getting in trouble. Okay.
Yeah, I read today Canada's going to be giving UNRWA funds again.
There's big problems in Montreal. They just got an injunction against demonstrations in front of synagogues and schools, Jewish schools.
Anyways, I didn't mean to bring up painful subjects. I just
Let's go back to the entrails.
all right. So this is the Mishnah. Can we all agree that the Mishnah is a welcome change of pace to our previous topic? Changing things up. So the Gemara goes back to our original point. You bring a pomegranate wood spit. The Gemara says, hold on a second. V'naisi shel mateches. Typically, in commercial cooking establishments, our cooking utensils are made out of metal, which is a whole lot more durable. So the Gemara says, no, there's a problem. We already know the problem because we read Rashi. Metal conduct heat. And if you have any portion of it exposed to the fire, the heat will travel down the entirety of the spit, v'komitve machmas hashvud, and part of the meat will be roasted from the spit. V'rachamana Omar, and the Torah says, Sliyesh, it has to be actually roasted and not just roasted to fire. V'loy sli, but not roasted machmas davar acher. So I actually stand corrected a little bit. I was highlighting the word sali, but in truth, the main punchline here that truly informs our question is Sliyesh. It has to be roasted on fire. So the Gemara says, V'naisi shel dekel. Why are we exclusively using pomegranate wood? Use palm wood. Now we all live in Florida, so we know a thing or two about palms. So we probably wouldn't ask this question. So the Gemara answers, Aidi Islay Shibi. The way the palm wood is, there are shibi. It's rows of branches. And mapik maya. It emits moisture.
You get your result?
The hebekimevushal, and it'll be effectively like you've cooked it because you're using the moisture. Okay, v'naisi sheltaena, use fig wood. Aidi the mechalchal. Fig wood is hollow or more hollow. Mafik maya v'abalekimevushal. It also secretes liquids. Now I don't know enough about fig wood to independently confirm this, but I'm going to take the Gemara's word for it. The Gemara knows the different woods and the different natures. Let's look at Rashi Mechalchal. Ke'etz shel arava v'shel egos sheyesh lahem moyach b'fim. Suffice it to say, there is some moisture, there's some sap in these woods, and it would have a detrimental effect, or it would at least cause part of the cooking to be the commingling of heated liquid, and it's not perfect and complete.
So how much liquid constitutes bishul?
So apparently it's not necessarily how much liquid, it's the area that touches the liquid will be mevushal. So even if it's a very small amount, we want to avoid it. That's what we seem to be saying. The Gemara says, okay. V'naisi shalalon, use an oak spit, or shel charuv, or a carob spit, v'shel shikma, or sycamore wood. And they indeed are, Rashi says, kshuhu kasha. The name alon is probably the etymology of the word alon, which means oak is connected to this strength, its might, its hardness. So the Gemara says there's another problem. Aidi the isbe hitri. These woods tend to have a lot of knots, and apparently from those knots, mapik maya, moisture can emerge. Let's read Rabbi Steinsaltz, because, excuse me. With regards to these trees, since it has knots, one must cut them off, smooth the branch. And wherever you cut it, it gives us water. Let me see Rashi. Boy the mishinu b'sakina mapik maya derech makam chatach hasakin v'avali pesach mevushal. I guess wood inherently has a certain amount of moisture. And the more processed the wood is going to be, the more potential for moisture. Now, I don't know enough about pomegranate wood. We should probably, and we're just 1 minute left, we should probably Google a pomegranate tree, because I've never seen one in real life. Maybe I did. Maybe when I was in Israel. So are they somewhat dainty, smaller trees, let's say? That seems to be the impression based on the pictures that were being shown. Let's look a little more. Pomegranate trees, they seem kind of small, thin. Pomegranate wood. Yeah, pomegranate's made out of wood. Shkoyach. I'm gonna have to take the Gemara's word for it. I don't quite visualize it, but again, that's on me. Oh. So let's do this really fast. The Gemara asks, so Rima Nami Isbe Kitri? Pomegranate wood also has knots. So the Gemara says, Shi'i kitri. The knots are smooth, and so you don't need to cut them. Begavna barshasa. We're talking about a baby tree, a young tree, a first-year tree that has no knots. The late kitri, like ikabe piske, a baby tree. If you cut it off, that area where you cut it's going to have moisture. My answer is the mapikle bay piske levar. You make sure that the area where you cut, the ends of the wood are not actually in the animal, and so the secretions are going past the animal. My difference.
That you could do with any of the woods.
No, the assertion is that all of the other woods will have to be smoothed out, and wherever you smooth it, you're trimming it with a knife, and wherever you're trimming with a knife, you're exposing an area where the moisture of the wood can emerge. Okay, I don't quite.
No, but the argument about the first year is applicable to all woods. Maybe all woods in the first year don't have knots.
You're making an important point. I don't know what to tell you.
I don't know. I'm not a wood expert, but I imagine it's a general thing. Alan.
It says that pomegranate wood is one of the best burning woods because it gives a hotter and longer burning life.
Interesting. So then
That makes sense.
well then, dear friends, thank you. Thank you for being here. Let's I didn't open as we usually do. We didn't designate or mention Eretz Yisrael or the members of our Chabura. So why don't we say it now? We daven as we close our learning for good news for all of Klal Yisrael, for the Bnei Eretz Yisrael, for the members of our Chabura. And we continue to remember with love our dear Yisrael Moshe ben Shmuel Halevi. And we should only have good news. I also want to mention Eliot ben Rabbanis Sipora for a complete and speedy refuah. And the chasana should be with good health and good simcha and good circumstances for all.
Amen. Amen.
And yes, we are in a recruiting phase. So if anyone has a contender, they have to. We're looking particularly if there's an attorney on the loose, we could reel them in. A Gemara Pesachim is probably a good Gemara because they're not going to become too cocky because there's less professional expertise, legal expertise needed for Pesachim. When we get into Baba Kama, Baba Basra, Sanhedrin, and like we want the attorney to be well integrated by that point. So anyways, have a wonderful day. Good news. And I hope later on today, Doctor, I hope I'll get you something that we can share with everybody regarding that. So we'll stay in touch. Gentlemen,
I believe there's a friend of mine. I think he's renting in Lemaire.
Okay.
He's a real chassid.
What's his name?
Jack.
Yossi Davis.
We know. Sure.
Wait. Not Jack. Not the Jack.
No, not Jack.
Jack went home yesterday, by the way.
Yeah. Yossi Davis. Very intelligent guy. I think he's a rabbi. I'm not sure.
Yeah, he's been around.
Yeah, but he would be
He's not on Lemaire. He's all the way down in like the Parker Dorado, maybe.
Or maybe he's in the Parker, yeah. But he would be a perfect candidate.
We met another Montreal physician, Dr. Cohen, who was here for Shabbos.
Right, he's an ophthalmologist. Vicky Cohen, his wife, was on the board when I was on the board.
Okay.
And, she's a epistle interior decorator, and he is the one really interested over the last few years in becoming more connected to